Hello and welcome to the York Creators Podcast. My name is Ben Porter, and each week you can join me as I chat to someone from York's creative community. This week's guest is Katie Greenbrown. Katie is a writer and a poet. She writes copy, scripts, spoken word, fiction, experimental films and long letters to friends. She's part of York's ever-growing spoken word scene, runs PechKucha night on behalf of Artsbarge, and is creating experimental work with Northern Electric Collective. In this episode we discuss their upcoming World War I centenary memorial project happening in Rowntrees Park, how where you live affects the themes you choose to explore in your work, how art can change your perception on history and heritage, and the all-important question of why humans have the drive to create. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, how long have you lived in York, and what was it that brought you here?
So, I moved to York from Chapel Allerton in Leeds in May 2013, I think it was. And it was for the York Steiner School. That's what brought me here in the first place. I had been looking into schools for my very tiny child, and I came across the whole Steiner thing, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment, really. And at the time, there was not a full Steiner school in Leeds. It was only a kindergarten. And I thought, well, we'll come across and have a look at the school and see what we think of it. And it seemed great. It was really creative, really different, really interesting. And with York being so close to Leeds, it just felt like the right decision. It was still commutable and all the sort of connections were still there. So, made the leap of faith and moved across and haven't regretted it for a moment, actually.
Yeah, so I know nothing about the Steiner School. What is it that's interesting about that, and how is it different to other schools?
So, it's a much more creative and broad curriculum, and like the Scandinavian model, they don't believe that children should start formal education until they're 6, rising 7. Okay. So it sort of follows the same system that they have in Scandinavia and Germany, I think. So they learn to read and write later, and before that it's much more about free play and being outside. And then when they do enter formal education, it's, like I said, much broader curriculum. They do things like gardening and a lot more art. And it's the school I wish I'd gone to. In Steiner schools, they pay attention to the aesthetic quite a lot, so it's about quality and softness and warmth and creating a good environment for people to learn, I suppose. So that really appealed.
So what was your opinion of York before you moved here, and how has that changed?
I didn't realise that people actually lived in York. I thought it was just a place where people came to visit, just a kind of almost like a film set, a historical backdrop, that you'd go on school trips or day trips or whatever to see its museums and, walk down the shambles and take pictures. And I didn't know, how that would feel after living in Leeds. And I was just really, really pleasantly surprised. It's just so different to what I imagined. There is that kind of whole chocolate box quality to it. But actually, when you live here, they're not the places that you spend time. And there really is like a genuine city underneath all that, and a genuine community, and lots of interesting, less twee kind of things going on. So I think that was a real revelation, actually, and I suppose that's part of the reason why I said, I imagined myself going back to Leeds loads, and then when I discovered that, the richness and what York was really about, then that wasn't something that was the case. And for me, one of the sort of ins really was getting involved in the spoken word scene. I went to see something a few years ago in the Great Yorkshire Fringe, and it was I think it might have been the Gob Off or something, that was at the theatre, and it was another real sort of light bulb moment. I thought, wow, there's all this stuff going on. There's a really strong kind of spoken word scene. Isn't this interesting? This is not the York that I thought I knew. And then getting involved in that, you get involved in one thing, and then suddenly that, because it's such a small place and because the creative scene is connected in a lot of ways, then getting involved in one thing takes you into another thing, and then all of a sudden you feel like you've put down roots, and you're part of something, I suppose.
Yeah, it's quite an easy place to meet people as well, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's the same faces often. You see a whole variety of different events like theatre stuff or music stuff or whatever. It'll be the same. You'll start to recognise people quite quickly, won't you?
Do you think living here has influenced the themes that you look at and kind of develop in your work?
I think you can't help but be influenced by that kind of thing. I think the whole railway heritage in York, and the whole, the Vikings and all the different stamps that different periods of history have put on the city. While you might think, stuff and nonsense, I have my own themes that I pursue, I think you can't help it but be influenced subliminally by York itself. And somebody pointed out the other day that nearly everything I've been working on recently has bridges in it. Okay. So I was like, okay, well, so there's clearly an influence. And then I've been working on projects involving the history of the river, and that's obviously something that's really, it's like fundamental to York, isn't it? And it's a really unique sort of part of York. So absolutely, yeah, definitely.
And it can change your perception on things as well. Like I remember when I moved here, I probably went to the Royal Museum at some point and I thought, it's all right, but it's not quite that interesting.
Yeah.
And then when we did the PechKucha about, was it the Fabric of the City one? Mm-hmm. Or maybe it was the one before, when the guy was talking about how York is built on trains. Mm-hmm. And just him talking about trains for like 6 minutes was like, oh yeah, we should actually be really proud of what's happened here. Mm-hmm. And all this kind of history and heritage that we've got. And just having somebody talking about it in a different way kind of changed the way I thought about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that museum I think is utterly unique. I don't think there's probably any collection as large anywhere of trains. So yeah, perhaps things aren't just for visitors. Perhaps, I know they have the Residents' Weekend, don't they, where they really try and get that message across that these museums, these galleries, all these sort of tourist attractions are for the people of York. But yeah, I suppose it's easy to forget. I love the Railway Museum. I really do, and I've had some great moments. I used to go in there and write quite a lot, and they have a kind of like a library upstairs where you can go and sit and work. And I've overheard some brilliant conversations in the Railway Museum, and I've kind of, done a bit of found poetry where I've taken these conversations, just absolute kind of great poetry, funny, interesting and whatever, and I've used them as a starting point for writing. So public spaces like that can be really rich, I think, for creative inspiration. So yeah. So
how do you approach things like that? Because Dave Jarman's talked about that quite a lot, kind of finding different things and putting them together. And for me, I can write, but I can't write in the same way that you guys do, or I don't have much experience of it. Mm-hmm. What's the kind of process of putting something together like that?
I think sometimes it's just an initial spark of inspiration, and you almost can't, it doesn't feel like a thought process. Something somebody will say will set off a train of thought. And it's, I guess, the most important thing for me is about having just a notebook and pen and making notes, not thinking that I'm going to retain it in my mind until later, just noting it all down and then coming back later to explore it.
So what are you working on at the moment?
At the moment, I'm doing a project for Rowntrees Park. It's a World War I centenary project, and that's with the collective Northern Electric, which is artist Peter Roman, me, and then the composer James Rochell. And we approached the Friends of Rowntree Park a few months back to ask them what their plans were for marking the centenary of World War I, the Armistice Day centenary in November. And they welcomed us with open arms. They just said they'd had some ideas, but there was nothing resolved. And so they were looking for some artists or theatre makers or spoken word people to run a project for them. That's going to be hopefully launching just before half term, and it's going to be a multimedia project. And I think there's some other interesting stuff going on. They're going to do some life-size willow soldiers, and they're going to form part of the trail that we're going to create. So it should be really nice, and it's nice as somebody who lives near Rowntree Park, who lives in South Bank. I feel personally quite invested in that space. I feel very lucky to have it, and so it's nice to be able to be involved in something that's local and community based. And then there's a few other things bubbling up. We're hoping to develop a film poem that we've been working on into a larger theatre piece, hopefully for next year. And that's the first time that we've tackled something that's full length. So that should be good. And then I've got some other bits of spoken word and things going on. So a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, tons.
But a good mixed bag.
So what was the last thing you challenged yourself to do creatively?
Speak to you.
Okay. That's always a good one to do.
Yeah, in an interview format.
Well, it doesn't have to be the last time. Like, can you think of a time when you had to make a bold creative decision? Something you were maybe a bit nervous about, and you took a gamble and it paid off?
I think poetry slamming can be a challenge.
Can you describe what that is for someone who doesn't know?
Yeah, of course. So it's big in the spoken word scene, and it's a night where say 10 or 12 poets all perform back to back. And there's usually a voting system. You either perform head to head against another poet, and it's sort of sudden death, only one poet goes through, or there's a voting system after every poet has done their poem. And at the end of the night, you end up with a winner. And I suppose it's just an interesting way of getting audiences to engage with spoken word, to have some sort of purpose to it rather than just performances by poets. And it can be quite nerve-wracking depending on where you go. I did the Great Northern Slam in Newcastle earlier this year, and that was a really great experience. It was so lovely, and it was in a great theatre, and it was really nurturing and wonderful. But that was a sudden death one, and so you're pitted against another poet, and there's a piece of technology that runs behind you, almost a bit like Countdown, while people are voting in the audience, and you're standing there being judged, and that is quite nerve-wracking, I think, and that's always a challenge, to be your be your best, and to get up no matter what's going on in your head, to get up, remember your words, and perform, and give the audience something good, and then go away from that not feeling at all dejected if you don't win or you're not successful, because obviously everybody can't be successful every time, and I suppose to see the fun of it, and then it's a great way to share spoken word with audiences rather than it being something that you're being judged on.
And just to learn and grow as well, because you find particularly, I think I was mentioning this to Rose when she was on the podcast, but if you mess up, you're going to learn from that, whereas if you just keep doing it in your bedroom all the time, you don't get any feedback, and you can think it's amazing, but if you don't share it, what's the point?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's a definite case for saying that you haven't really learnt a poem off by heart until you've performed it and remembered the words, because you may practice it over and over at home or when you're riding your bike or at work or whatever, but until you've actually performed it in front of a live audience, I don't think you truly have learns it. And what happens is it's almost like at that point it goes into muscle memory, or something clever happens, some kind of magic, and then after that you feel that it's gone deeper in somehow, and you are able to remember it at a deeper level. So yeah, there is a value to being fearful and overcoming your fear, and in that way, I think.
It's really useful for confidence as well. If you can get up and do that on stage, then that's really helpful for the rest of wider life.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is there to sort of fear if you and in spoken word, I think particularly because you make yourself vulnerable on a couple of different levels. You're having to get up in front of an audience, which is nerve-wracking, and perform, but also you're performing your own words and your own opinions. It's not, you haven't learned a script and you're performing somebody else's words, so that makes you doubly vulnerable. So if you're, it's a kind of gift to an audience, I suppose, to expose yourself in that way, and if you're able to do that, then it's a feeling of achievement, really, I think.
If somebody was interested in coming along to watch a slam, where would they go in York?
So first port of call would be Say Out, I think, who run a monthly slam in the basement, and that's just a really, really great night. A real mixed bag of all sorts of different people come and perform, and the whole night is made to be really fun and inclusive, and that's a great sort of point for dipping your toe in the water. I've taken people along to that who would never think that they'd want to go and access poetry, and because spoken word is this kind of hybrid between theatre and poetry, people who would never pick up a volume of poems find that I'm sort of incredibly entertained or moved or emotionally engaged with this art form that I thought was not for me. So yeah, I think they're doing a lot of really great stuff. So
what would your advice be to someone who's interested, maybe they've never given a thought to kind of performing, they're maybe writing secretly? What would you suggest would be a good starting point if they want to kind of push that a bit further?
I think just do. I think if something's the old adage, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. So I think just do, just try. And if it's not good, or you're not happy with it, or you don't get the reaction you want, don't be put off. Just keep trying. And that's the thing with being creative. It's about doing something, and then often from that point you'll end up moving forward, maybe in a different way than you imagine, but something will come of it. And sometimes it feels like only inching forward, but that's only possible by actually doing something.
Why do you think people have the drive to create things?
Yeah, that's a strange one, isn't it? Sometimes I think that you almost like populate this private landscape when you're a child, when you play, and that being creative is almost harking back to that, and you're drawing little bits from that landscape and sort of revisiting it and reimagining it, and using sort of drawing on that rich world. And sometimes I think that's what it's about, and then other times I feel like it's about giving yourself some kind of armor, and that's what it feels like to me sometimes, that I'm able to kind of cope with sort of the everyday, not that it's that bad or anything, and sort of cope with the mundane and all of the things that we sort of have to do, if I have this armor of creativity and this other part of my brain that's like worrying away and thinking away about these projects or these themes and these things I'm exploring in my work. And I don't know if it is like that for everybody, but yeah, it just feels like a special kind of protective shield. And if you go through periods where you don't create, then you almost don't realise that something's missing. And then when you are working intensely on something, you think, oh, that's what was missing. You just feel better. You feel like everything's complete somehow. So it's a very sort of mysterious and magical process. And I don't know whether I really subscribe to the idea that some people are creative and some people aren't. I believe it's something that, almost like as a species, that we all need to do to some degree, as like a kind of enriching kind of process, and as a sort of like release or as a kind of protection or something. So I'm sort of all up for everybody having a go and pursuing some kind of creative endeavour.
Yeah, because if you boil it down, it's just problem solving, and everybody has problems that they need to solve.
Yeah.
So I think if you can think creatively, which is something that everybody can do to a point, I think that can definitely help you in life, and any way that you can practice that and stretch it like a muscle is going to really help you.
And were you always creative, sort of growing up and as a child and whatnot?
I wouldn't have really called it that. I was never good at like drawing and things, and when you're kind of little, you're sort of told that's what creativity is. Mm-hmm. But my mum would always give me bits and pieces of like loo rolls and things, and I'd like make stuff out of it.
Yeah.
The first time I got a camera, I'd always be filming my friends, like, okay, let's pretend to make it's always like a stupid kung fu film or something.
Yeah.
I worked out once that a camera, you can film it in slow motion and speed it up. Mm-hmm. So I had all my friends running around in slow motion, like hitting each other and like throwing each other, and then we sped it back and watched that, and then got into music and But so that was an interesting thing. I never thought any of this stuff could ever be like a career, or you could do it to make money out of. Mm-hmm. I was always kind of told that you would have a job and then you would do this other stuff on the side. And that's something that comes up quite a lot with lots of podcast guests. Not many people are really told that you can do creative things for a career. And the ones that do, they're always kind of seen as like the lucky ones.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know if in the olden days, in days gone by, there was a real sense that it was so out on a limb to try and pursue a creative career that you had to have a kind of academic real world backup, and that's why people would be told, oh, you must get your proper A levels or your proper degree or your apprenticeship or whatever, and then if you want to pursue some kind of artistic endeavour or creative endeavour, then that'd have to be in your spare time. And I think definitely for me, I'd always written, and I'd written all through school. I did, poetry and fiction and little bits of theatre and all sorts of things. But I had no idea how to turn that into a job. And I was, advised you should, go and do something proper at university. So I did English literature and Spanish. How rooted they are in the real world, I'm not quite sure. But, after that, I just had absolutely no idea. And I think I had no idea what kind of jobs were out there, and I had no idea about creative industries whatsoever. And so how to turn your writing into something that, pays your rent and, puts food on the table is really, really difficult. And I think sometimes it's only through experience and trying things that you sort of go through these whole journeys of trying different things, and you finally get to a point where you understand what there is out there, and you're able to kind of patchwork together a way to pursue, the projects that you really want to pursue, whilst having an income as well. But I think it's a lifelong challenge for people who work in creative industries and work in the arts. So many people that you talk to have the cafe job, the bar job or whatever to sort of underpin the stuff that they're wanting to work on, the stuff that they're wanting to get off the ground. So yeah, it is a really difficult one, and whether you pursue the academic route to get into it, do you go and try and do a master's in creative writing, or is that the best springboard, or is it better to be almost take the DIY approach? And because we're so connected now with the technologies that we have, there's so much more that you can do at home yourself, and you're not waiting for the big call to come from a publishing house necessarily. You can be so much more grassroots, I think, about things. And so that's one positive thing, for younger people coming through now. It isn't the same world, where you're waiting for the big recording contract or the big book deal or whatever. You can feel empowered, I think, to try stuff and have your voice heard, which can only be a positive thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. The barrier to entry has definitely been lowered. Like when I left school, I kind of started a band, and we basically built our own recording studio, which wouldn't have been possible 30 years ago. And then eventually that didn't make any money, so I started a film company, and buying a camera again was loads cheaper than it would have been 30 years ago.
Yep.
So that's definitely a good thing. I guess then you get the other side of like many more people getting into it, but hopefully that would raise the level, make everybody better.
Yeah, and I suppose then it comes down to, is this endeavour about great critical acclaim and fame, or are you driven to do it because you're driven to do it because you want to lose yourself in a project and it's just so much fun, and is just enough money kind of thing, so that that makes it perhaps more viable. But yeah, it is interesting, and it's an ongoing challenge, I think, for everybody involved.
So what have you got coming up in the future then?
So I want to try to keep pursuing the multimedia sort of aspect of spoken word, and to do more film poems, and to do more stuff with soundtracks, and then to really see whether we can develop some of the work that we've been producing into longer length theatre pieces, interested in putting theatre on in different places.
And you also got PechKucha, which you run with Peter.
PechKucha, yeah, which is going from strength to strength. It's been a really fun journey, sort of taking that over. And we're trying to do it more thematically based, so that each volume of it has its own unique theme, and that we get our presenters to respond kind of creatively to the theme in any way that they see fit, and that leads to a real mixed bag of stuff, really eclectic, and a great way to find out what's going on in York, community-wise, arts-wise. Yeah, and we've got something new which we're going to trial at the next PechKucha, which is in October. So we're going to do an improvised presentation, and we're inviting a local comedian to come along, and he won't have seen the slides in advance, so he's going to get 20 random slides, and he's going to improvise a presentation, so that should be quite fun.
Is that 30th October? 30th
of October, yeah.
Cool.
And we've got a really good list of potential presenters, and a few of them have confirmed, so it should be a great one. That'll be at the Cycle Heaven, Cafe 68 Cycle Heaven again, and the space seems to be working really well, so I'm really excited about that.
And if people want to find out more about what you do, is there any links, any places they can go, or places they can see your work?
Yeah, we've got with Northern Electric, the arts collective I was talking about, our Facebook page is a good place to start, and the PechKucha can be checked out at PechKucha's website, PechKucha York, and all of the presenters are on there, and all of the past videos. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me.